Hey guys, welcome. It's your boy, Red City, coming at you, host of Sports and Shorts of Sorts. What do we have on the agenda today? Well, we have the first time in Champions League history. We have the playoffs. Playoffs! Yes, playoffs. This is all leading up to the round of 16. Nine teams ranked 9 to 24 after 8 match days will be battling it out for the final 8 spots. The top 8 teams in Champions League play, they've already got their spots clinched. Ranked from 1st to 8th, you have Liverpool, Barcelona, Arsenal, Inter Milan, Atletico Madrid, Bayer Leverkusen, Lille, and Aston Villa. They can go on with their busy schedules while these 16 teams battle it out in a 2-leg playoff. The lower seed, will host the first leg. The higher seed will host the second. Not a long wait either for the second leg, as they'll get played next week. So let's check out these matchups and see what I can forecast. I'll start with the first legs taking place Tuesday, February 10th, which is today. So we have a 4-game slate, 3 games played at the same time, with 1 game played earlier in the day. I don't know if it's a spotlight game or why did they decide this game. We'll start with that game, and it's going to be an all-French affair. The 2 teams that finished quite close in the standings of Champions League play, finishing with 13 points each after 8 matches. 18th seed Brest and 15th seed PSG. The tiebreaker was in PSG's favor, with 6 goals better in goal difference, and Brest had a great start to Champions League play, going unbeaten in their first 4 matches, beating SK Sturm Graz, Red Bull Salzburg, and Sparta Praha, plus throw a draw on with German champions Leverkusen. It's pretty good. Brest would then lose their first match of the campaign, falling on the road to Barcelona, but they'd bounce back with a nice win over PSV to flirt with chances of making the top 8. But then they lose a crucial game on the road to Shakhtar Donetsk, followed by a loss at home to Real Madrid. Those 2 losses had them dropping down to 18th in the table. Paris Saint-Germain, they fell short of their expectations for Champions League play. They came into the campaign expecting to finish in one of those top 8 spots. They started the season off with a win over Girona, but fell in London to Arsenal. They then fell at home to Atletico Madrid, followed by a loss on the road to Bayern Munich. Those string of tough losses, the tough teams, put the Parisian side in jeopardy of missing the playoffs. Well, this team was too good to go down without a fight. PSG would string off 3 consecutive wins to put away any doubts of missing the Champions League playoffs, beating Red Bull Salzburg, Manchester City, and Stuttgart, winning those 3 matches by a combined score of 11-3, riding high going into the playoffs. And these 2 teams are quite familiar with each other. I mentioned both French clubs play in the French top division. They played twice this year in the league play. PSG winning the first match at home, beating Brest 3-1. Then less than 2 weeks ago, Brest hosted PSG in a thrilling match. The hosts fought back to make it 3-2 with 20 minutes to go, but PSG would secure 2 late goals to secure the 5-2 win. So despite Brest's impressive performances around Europe, they just can't seem to get the best of PSG. And I don't see too much changing in this matchup. At home, Brest may secure a draw. They'd be loving that. They'd be loving a win over PSG today, but I don't see much more than a draw. And with that said, I see PSG taking care of business in the French capital next week. I see PSG coming out victors in this French meeting, even if there are some setbacks. Brest will be leaning on forward Ludovic Ajorc, as well as Abdallah Sima, who's on loan from Brighton. While PSG, they're like, wow, we might have a hole with Marco Asensio, leaving to join Aston Villa in the Premier League. But that hole was filled and then some. Georgian superstar Kvaratskhelia surprised many, leaving Serie A leaders Napoli to join the French Giants. The first Georgian player to suit up for PSG, and it came with a price, rumored to be about 80 million euros. This could be a fun matchup, but despite their closeness in the Champions League table, I have PSG advancing to the round of 16. The next matchup features 2 clubs that are a little further away than our first matchup, both in the table and geographically. We have the 23rd ranked team just sneaking in the playoffs, Sporting. The Portuguese side limped into the playoffs after their manager Ruben Amorim took on the Manchester United job in the Premier League, going winless in their last 4 Champions League matches. But this club, they came out of the gates looking pretty good, beating Lille to start the campaign, followed by a draw with PSV. Sporting would then go on the road and beat Sturm Graz before returning home and beating Manchester City. But that's when the manager left for a different Manchester club, and the impact was immediate. Sporting hosted Arsenal, lost 5-1. They follow that loss up with two more, losing the club Brugge and Red Bull Leipzig. They win the match day 8, desperately needing at least a point, and they were able to secure that at home against Bologna to barely qualify for the playoffs. Sporting take on German side Borussia Dortmund. The 10th seeded club won their match day 8 match, but losing 2 games in a row prior to that hurt their chances of qualifying for the top 8. Dortmund, they've struggled this season compared to their high standards. That's why manager Nuri Sahin was dismissed on January 22nd. Mike Tuelberg filled in as caretaker until Dortmund hired Niko Kovac. He managed his first match over the weekend where Dortmund fell to Stuttgart, not the start he was looking for, but he's hoping to have things turned around for Dortmund coming into this one. The club has only won twice this calendar year in all competitions. 2 wins in 8 matches won't do it for a club with such high expectations. And Dortmund started the Champions League off pretty well. 10 goals in their first 2 matches, beating Bruges 3-0, followed by a 7-1 drubbing of Celtic. Dortmund was then humbled in Madrid, losing to Real 5-2, but they bounced back to barely squeak a home win over SK Sturm Graz. The win in Croatia over Dynamo Zagreb put Dortmund in a chance to qualify for the top 8, but losing to Barcelona and Bologna in their final 2 matches killed those chances. So with different factors playing into this game, it's a tougher to call game than you'd think a 10 versus 23 should be. Dortmund, they should win this matchup, but I could see them going into Portugal and throwing out a stinkfest, leaving themselves in such a big hole that it might be tough to overcome back in Germany. And Sporting have one of the best goal scorers on the planet right now. The 26-year-old Swedish superstar Victor Gyökeres, I can't get his name right, one day I will, has 6 goals in Champions League play, which is good enough for 5th, shared by 7 players. Plus, he's been dynamite in league play, 22 goals in 21 matches to have Sporting atop League of Portugal. Despite my praise of the Swedish star, I still think Dortmund will advance to the round of 16. I see them going on the road, playing mediocre as they have all year, but I see them doing enough in front of their home supporters to secure the win on aggregate and leave Niko Kovac's imprint on the club. Guirassy has been one of the best players in Champions League play of any team, and for Dortmund, he's tied with Barcelona's Robert Lewandowski for top scorer in Champions League play with 9 goals. Dortmund, they're going to give some fans some fright, but they'll be moving on to the next round. You have a juicy matchup featuring some 2 big-name clubs in European football, and a rarity is both these teams already faced off against each other earlier in Champions League play. The host of the first leg may seem surprising. 20th seed Juventus were coming to Champions League play, hoping to qualify for a top 8 spot. The team was finished runner-up in Champions League European Cup more than anybody else, finishing runner-up 7 times. They found themselves playing pretty lackluster and barely squeaking into the playoffs. In Serie A, they also haven't played up to their level, currently sitting 5th in the top Italian division. They started the Champions League campaign off with 2 straight wins, but they go winless in 3, a loss at home by German side Stuttgart, followed by back-to-back draws. Juventus bounced back with a big win over Man City, but then dropped their play in a scoreless draw with Club Brugge, followed by a tough loss at home to Portuguese side Benfica. Some extra pressure on new manager Thiago Motta. The Italian legend had some success with Bologna, getting them in the Champions League last season, but overachieving at a small club feels a lot better than underachieving at a big club. So I think there'll be some pressure on Juventus and Motta, especially hosting this first leg, a team they are familiar with as they beat them in match day 1 of Champions League play, Dutch side PSV Eindhoven. PSV, they have some youngsters that love to score goals, and I feel despite being the higher seed in this matchup, they're going to be coming in as underdogs, and maybe that'll help them play a little looser. And if they can get a good result in Turin, they have the talent to pull the win off in this matchup. They hosted Liverpool in match day 8 and gave the English Giants their lone loss in Champions League play, thrusting the club up the table. PSV's 22-year-old American Ricardo Pepi, he could have some magical moments going up against fellow Americans on the Juventus side, Timothy Weah, Weston McKennie. I see Juventus playing pretty well for Motta at home, earning a win. But next week, look for PSV to throw everything at Juventus, and they'll celebrate with a big win in front of the Dutch home crowd. I know it shouldn't be an upset because they're the higher seed in Champions League play, but I still feel they're going to be underdogs, and they're going to come out on top. A matchup that looks more like a Champions League final than a playoff knockup round. We have a meeting of the last two Champions League champions. Current Premier League title holders Manchester City have played some of the worst football we've ever seen since Pep Guardiola took over. We've actually witnessed some of the worst football by any Pep managed team. This disastrous play throughout all competitions has made this a dreadful season for a team expecting to win every time they're on the pitch. Their 11 points in Champions League play had them tied with the last teams to qualify for the playoffs, and their goal difference in clutch win in match day 8 over Club Brugge was the only reason they even qualified for the playoffs. And like I said, it just isn't the Champions League. Man City has won Manchester City, that is the team that has won the last 4 Premier League titles, sit in 5th place outside of a Champions League spot in the Premier League. They started the Champions League off pretty well, drawing with Italian giants AC Milan. They followed that up with consecutive wins, beating Slovan Bratislava and Sparta Praha by a combined score of 9-0. But then they went into Portugal and got stunned by Sporting. After a tough draw at home with Feyenoord, City would lose 2 straight. Granted the tough competition, losing in Italy to Juventus and losing in Paris to PSG, that put the club in serious jeopardy of missing the playoffs, which would have been mind-blowing. But they responded with a nervy win over Club Brugge that I alluded to earlier. So what is the reward for a club that barely squeaked into the playoffs? Well, a date with last year's La Liga champions and Champions League champions, Real Madrid. The current leaders of La Liga faced some early turmoil in Champions League play, losing 3 of their first matches before reeling off 3 consecutive wins, finished with 15 points and 11th place in the table. They opened the campaign with a big win over Stuttgart, only to go into France and lose to Lille. They'd bounce back with a win over Dortmund, but then they'd lose 2 in a row against some tough competition as well, losing at home to AC Milan and then losing at Anfield to Liverpool. That put some doubt in some supporters, but Real Madrid responded as Real Madrid does, winning a massive game in Italy against Atalanta, followed by big wins against Salzburg and Brest, winning those latter 2 matches by a combined 8-1 score. I mean, this could be one hell of a matchup if the real Man City shows up. Their last Premier League matchup was a 5-1 drubbing by the hands of Arsenal, followed by an FA Cup tie this past weekend with League One side Leyton Orient, shout out East London where I used to live, a match that had City trailing 1-0 at halftime before they came back and won. So the optimistic side of me is hoping for a close matchup. I think City will keep it close at home with a tough competitor, Real Madrid, coming in. But when the second leg goes down in the Spanish capital next week, I see Carlo Ancelotti's Real Madrid coming out on top on this one. The most winningest club in Champions League European Cup history. They'll be looking for another one. Winning this matchup by a few goals on aggregate, but with the number of superstars on this pitch from both sides, it could literally go in any direction. I'm just hoping for tons of goals. But we'll see. It should be an intriguing matchup that you don't expect to see this early in a competition like this. We go to the Wednesday games. The early game on Wednesday, the 12th, features 2 clubs on the opposite sides of the Champions League table. One club narrowly missing out on the top 8, taking on the last qualifying team for the playoffs, 24th seed Belgian side Club Brugge, lost to Man City on match day 8 that I mentioned earlier, a loss that almost had the Belgian side falling out of the playoffs. But despite the loss to City, Brugge still had a slightly better goal difference than Dynamo Zagreb, and Brugge finished in that gang tied on 11 points and had a 3-goal better difference than the Croatian side that missed out. Felt bad for Zagreb missing out like that, but Club Brugge, they had an up and down start to the Champions League, losing to Dortmund, bouncing back to beat Sturm Graz, losing to AC Milan, but bouncing back to stun Premier League side Aston Villa. They'd continue a great run, drawing in Glasgow with Celtic before securing a win over Sporting. They then hosted Italian side Juventus and held them to a scoreless draw, which led up to the matchday 8 loss to City. But hey, they're in the playoffs. That's all that matters, right? Club Brugge, who sits second in the Belgian Pro League, they get to host the first of 2 legs against some stiff Italian competition. Atalanta barely missed out on the top 8. They started the campaign with a scoreless draw against Arsenal, followed that up with a win over Shakhtar Donetsk and a draw with Celtic. They didn't get back on winning ways, beating German side Stuttgart, and they dominate Swiss side Young Boys. Atalanta would then suffer their only loss in Champions League play, a tough 3-2 loss by the feet of Real Madrid, and Atalanta would then thumb Sturm Graz in matchday 7, putting them in great position to make the top 8. They'd have a tough matchup, though. They'd need a win going up against Barcelona, and it was a thrilling game against the Catalan Giants, but The match ended 2-2, and the draw would not help Atalanta in this, so they'd miss out on the top 8, missing out on automatic qualification for the round of 16, and would have to earn their way through the playoffs. They're currently sitting third in the Serie A table, and they're coming into this game a bit of a Goliath to the Belgian David. Bruges are tough at home, and I see them holding Atalanta to a hard-fought draw like Colin Farrell and Bruges. And the best case scenario for them, I think, is a draw. But when they go to Italy next week, I'm expecting Atalanta to thump Club Bruges, go on to the round of 16. It shouldn't be an issue for Atalanta. An interesting matchup between two clubs that have pretty big leads atop their respective league. 21st seed Celtic. They've had a pretty good Champions League campaign. It was a little topsy-turvy opening the league by thumping Slovan Bratislava 5-1, but then they were the one that got thumped, taking a 7-1 beating by the feet of Dortmund. And the Scottish Premier League leaders would go unbeaten in their next 5. Some pretty good results too, wins over Leipzig and Young Boys, while also securing 3 draws, including a hard-fought draw with the before-mentioned Atalanta. The streak was broken in matchday 8 when Premier League side Aston Villa scored 2 unanswered second-half goals to take the 4-2 win. Still, finishing 21st is pretty good for a Celtic side that gets looked down on a bit for playing in the Scottish Premier League. They will certainly get a chance to make a name for themselves. They're going to be taking on Bavarian giants Bayern Munich, the third most winningest club in Champions League European Cup history. Bayern finished 12th in the seedings, and this season they either beat up on you or took a beating. They won 5 games, lost 3. The losses weren't pleasant. Bayern scored 9 on Dynamo Zagreb to open the campaign, ultimately putting Zagreb to death by goal difference to kick off the campaign. But then Bayern lost on the road to Aston Villa 1-0, followed by another loss, 4-1 beatdown by Barcelona. Bayern would then reel off some wins, beating Benfica, PSG, and Shakhtar Donetsk. But then Bayern went into the Netherlands to take on Feyenoord and fell flat, getting crushed 3-0 by the Dutch side. Bayern then took care of Slovan Bratislava in matchday 8 to finish off the season, but that disappointing result against Feyenoord really cost Bayern's chances of making the top 8. They're still the favorites coming into this matchup, and the Bundesliga leaders, they look back on track to reclaim the Bundesliga title after the unbeatables Leverkusen won it last year, and Bayern Munich have eyes on a Champions League title as well. They haven't hoisted the trophy since the 2019-20 season and are looking to win it in Vincent Kompany's first season managing the club. The first leg in Glasgow, I feel will have a rowdy feel to it. It'll get rowdier if Celtic get an early opening goal, but I think best case for Celtic, they can get a draw at home, but I don't see Celtic going in the Allianz Arena next week and beating Bayern Munich. So I have Bayern Munich ending Celtic's Champions League run and advancing to the round of 16. The closest matchup that you can literally have in these Champions League playoffs features the 16th seed taking on the 17th seed. Both teams finishing with 13 points, one with a slightly better goal differential. And the two teams faced each other earlier in the Champions League play, battling it out in match day 5. One of only 2 matchups that feature a rematch from earlier. I already mentioned Juventus and PSV was the other. The host of the first leg and the owner of the 17th spot is Ligue 1 side Monaco. The club from the small principality currently sit 4th in the French top division, and they've had an up and down season across all competition. Champions League play no different. Monaco coming out of the gate swinging, hosting Barcelona and beating the Catalan side. They then draw in Croatia with Dinamo Zagreb before hosting Red Star Belgrade and blowing them out 5-1. Monaco would go unbeaten in 4, but they'd go into Italy and beat Bologna 1-0. But then the fizzling began a bit. They'd lose at home in a hard-fought game, followed by a 3-0 beatdown in London by Arsenal. Then Monaco would go back against another Premier League side, hosting Aston Villa and beating them. But then Monaco went on the road and got beaten up by Inter Milan. Kind of form makes Monaco a tough team to read. You don't know if they're going to lay a beating, take a beating, or battle out a scoreless duel. They'll have to figure it out, though, before they host Portuguese side Benfica. The club currently sits 2nd in Liga Portugal, and they've been playing pretty well. Benfica beat Monaco earlier this season, winning 3-2 in Monaco. And much like Monaco, Benfica has been a tough team to read. One thing they do is score. So if they allow goals, they're always going to be in it. They started the Champions League with a win over Red Star Belgrade, an absolute surprising beatdown of Atletico Madrid, beating them 4-0. Then Benfica lost 2 in a row, losing to Feyenoord and Bayern Munich. But then they had that nice win in Monaco, followed by a scoreless draw at home with Bologna. And then they were involved in one of, if not the best games of the Champions League this season, losing a crazy 5-4 match at home against Barcelona. Benfica then wrapped up the season with that 2-0 win over Juventus I mentioned earlier. And this This match could be determined by a coin flip. I think it's that close, but in close games, go with the team that can score anywhere, anytime, and that's Benfica to me. They're gonna beat Monaco and advance to the round of 16. The final playoff matchup, it's a nice one. Sitting in the 19th spots, Dutch side Feyenoord. They're not having an ideal domestic campaign, sitting fifth place in the Eredivisie, but in Champions League play, they've had some pretty good outings and some not good outings, like the opener when they lost 4-0 to Leverkusen, but they bounced back, winning on the road against Girona and Benfica, but then they'd stumble again, losing to Salzburg 3-1. Then we'd see some good football out of Feyenoord, securing a 3-3 draw in Manchester with City. They then win two in a row, beating Sparta Praha, and that big win over Bayern Munich I mentioned earlier. Feyenoord then wrapped up Champions League play by going on the road to take on Lille in France. They were banned from having visiting supporters due to risk of violence, and the lack of support seemed to impact the club more than they were expecting. After equalizing with Lille at 1 in the 14th minute, Feyenoord would give up 5 unanswered goals and end up losing 6-1. A brutal loss that moved Feyenoord down the table and helped clinch the top 8 spot for Lille based on goal difference. The Dutch side have no easy task ahead of them as they host the lucky 13th side AC Milan. The Italian Giants have had a relatively disappointing season, currently sitting 7th in the Serie A. They've already moved on to their second manager of the season, Sergio Conceição, taking over for the sacked Paulo Fonseca. But the club with the second most Champions League European Cup championships is looking to add another to the trophy case. Milan started the Champions League with back-to-back losses, losing to Liverpool and Leverkusen. I mean, that's a pair of L's that'll be handed out to anybody. Milan responded in a big way, reeling off 5 consecutive wins, beating Club Brugge, Real Madrid, Slovan Bratislava, Red Star Belgrade, and Girona. Then AC Milan would surprisingly have that streak snapped in match day 8 in Croatia by a hungry Dinamo Zagreb side trying to make the playoffs. Match day 8 loss was huge as it prevented AC Milan from clinching a top 8 spot, and now they have to play their way into the round of 16. And there's some personal drama involved in this one. Former Feyenoord forward, 23-year-old Mexican sniper Santiago Jimenez, he scored 2 goals in Feyenoord's Champions League win over Bayern Munich. He just moved to AC Milan in the transfer window, and Jimenez already scored off the bench in his Serie A debut. 2-0 win over Empoli over the weekend, and you know he's going to like to stick it against his former club. So I think in Eindhoven we're going to have a tough match, but on Italian soil, AC Milan's going to clinch the win, advancing to the round of 16. So there's your matchups. Again, it's starting today, going through tomorrow, followed by the second leg next week, getting those Champions League playoffs wrapped up in no time. Following the conclusion of these playoffs, the round of 16 will begin Tuesday, March 4th, the first of 2 legs. And if you were paying attention, you might have noticed I went with the higher ranked team in every matchup. I mean, like I said earlier, some matchups, the ranked team might actually be the underdog in this, but it's interesting to see how this new Champions League format will play out. Hopefully we get some good classics. It's just, the tough thing with Champions League here in North America, it's always on during the middle of our work days. So if you're able to watch it, awesome. If not, you're going to have to check out the dope highlights, and hopefully we get some good games. Thanks for tuning in to Boy Ren City. Enjoy the Champions League. The champions! Should be some good games, but thanks again for tuning in. Ren City out.